Welcome to our series on object relations theory. Today I'm going to discuss a little bit about the idea of bad objects and attaching to bad objects and how that can influence somebody's whole life and cause them to be in a continuous state of self-sabotage and of pain. Now, the idea of attachment theory these days is very well known in the field of psychology. But the idea of attaching to a bad object as opposed to a good early mother and good parents and a good family is very different. Bad objects are those that our initial mother and father, sometimes combined, that either are actively abusive or inadequate and depriving, but to some extent are not good enough to allow development to continue in the child. And in fact, they have a very negative effect on the person's psychological development and arrest that development. So when we fall in love with our first object, which we're compelled to do because the mother is the one we need and she's the only one in the world for us in the beginning, if she has serious problems, then the baby automatically gets attached to someone who is not good enough to allow their development to proceed. And sometimes the mother can be good till the age of about 2, where separation, individuation comes about in Margaret Muller's thinking, and where we begin to internalize the image of the mother, and it becomes a part of ourself and our internal world, having another there for us to contain us emotionally, to have a sense of being held from within, an internal holding environment, in D.W. Winnicott's words. So when the mother is seriously disturbed herself and she can't respond to where the child is and to the child's needs for both autonomy and connection, separation and connection, to be emotionally nurtured and in many different levels as development takes place, or she's actively abusive, intrusive, in Winnicott's terms, impinging, then the one we first love is not a good mother, but a bad mother. And therefore we talk about the bad object. The primal one is the mother, but then we can have a whole pathological family leading to the father attaching to an unavailable or assaultive or attacking father or narcissistic father. That then also continues then to build a bad object inside rather than a good object. And when there isn't enough of a good object, we don't just get a representation of the other and an image inside that gives us a symbolic sense of having another who nurtures us being within, so we can become more independent on our own because we have someone inside with us and giving us that containing, holding environment. If we don't have that, then we are compelled to take in the one we first loved, and we're compelled to identify with the other that is the one we're totally dependent on, our first parent. But we cannot develop a representation or an image of the other. Instead, we can't digest the other. We psychologically are imploded with an aversive psychological and somatic and visceral other that's inside of us but cannot be contained in an image or representation. So we actually feel assaulted from within, and we can't digest the sense of good stuff that we keep inside, bad stuff we get rid of. Instead, that can't take place because there's not enough good stuff. So this aversive, toxic other comes inside of us. In Ronald Fairbairn's terms, if you're starving and there's only a poison pie in the house, you eat the poison pie. And Ronald Fairbairn came from Scotland, was one of the first object relations theorists, first person to actually speak in terms of internalizing bad objects and then needing to expel them or exorcise them. So if we only eat the poison pie mother or parent, then we can't digest it, we can't sort out what's good and what's bad, we can't build an image that's good enough and then just separate from the bad stuff. Instead, we have something that's aversive and indigestible in a psychological way, but we're starving for an object because we have to have a primal object to make us whole. So we take in the parent that's there in an incorporative way, like we swallow it whole, and then we feel like we have to spit it out, just like a bulimic dynamic, but on a psychological level, taking in the poison pie parent and spitting it out. So there's this vicious cycle then, where we don't get what we need to build psychic structure in the mind, where we have an internal world with self and others and a blueprint inside of us for what relationships are like that are good enough to support our development. We don't get that. We just get this thing that we want to swallow because we're starving for the other and we need to have enough, but we can't keep it inside digested into an image. We just have to keep trying to get rid of it. We either turn it against ourselves and in an aversive way, or we turn it against others. And there's a continual cycle of taking in and spitting out the other, hoping the next person we meet will be a good guy that we can relate to, but because we have only the experience of a bad other, we immediately get terrified of this person or disappointed, and then they become bad, and so we take them in like we tried to take in the parent, and then we want to expel and get rid of that person. That's why relationships can't last, relationships can't be sustained. So for example, I have worked with someone who actually had a very good father, supportive of her full development, and someone she could really talk to throughout her life, and she's now fully an adult. But her first primal other was a mother who would very erratically attack her in an abusive way, take out all her rage and frustration on this one daughter, and would do it on a day-to-day basis. So the woman, my patient, the little girl grew up to be my patient, was tormented, assaulted, and accused by this mother on a daily basis. So it wasn't enough to have a good father who supported her. The primal parent, the mother, was more toxic or bad, like the poison pie that has to be swallowed, than good. And so my patient was continually hungering for acceptance by this mother that she couldn't get acceptance from, and then turned the accusations against herself and thought there was all kinds of bad stuff in her, thought she was bad in essence. And then later she would repeat these kind of sadomasochistic dramas with boyfriends, where at first they'd be all in love, just like an early symbiosis with the mother, but then pretty soon it would hit like the point that it was at with this mother in her early toddlerhood who couldn't sustain connection through a separation period. And then she would attack the boyfriend for anything and everything, just like her mother had attacked her. And that was her way, in Fairbairn's terms, of trying to exorcise, like in, the Catholics speak about exorcism. This is psychological exorcism. And Fairbairn used that word because he came actually from training in the church, and where he used that word for this. But this woman now is in a very different place because of her therapy, where she's sustaining a very good relationship with a man, and she's modulated, but she still feels his impulses to attack. And in other cases, she had totally destroyed relationships with really good guys who she was engaged to, who really wanted to be with her, who she loved, but she would re-experience that everything felt like a rejection to her because her mother had continually rejected her erratically and with some love, but a lot of rejection and accusation and devaluing her and rejecting her. So she would interpret things as rejections that weren't rejections, and she would then assault the guy the way her mother assaulted her. So this was the spitting out of the bad object after she swallowed. After she swallows the guy, in a sense, by being in love with him, merging with him in her mind and her body, she would then spit him out by being disappointed, interpreting things he did as or didn't do as rejection. Anything and everything could be interpreted that way by her. But at the beginning, before treatment, she didn't know she was interpreting anything. She would just feel, this guy is really rejecting me. He didn't say this, and I wanted him to say that. That means he can't really care about me. He's just playing the game with me. So she would get into these states where of fear and paranoia about how she's being treated, and always conclude she was being rejected. But it would happen in an instant. It wasn't something she thought about. She wasn't processing things, and she wasn't aware she was interpreting his behavior. She only knew she felt like a victim. He's doing this to me, or not doing, and I'm the victim. Just like she felt as a little girl and a very small toddler with her mother. So she would repeat this. Rather than keeping it all inside, she would implode and spew it out onto the boyfriend, and she would destroy the relationship. These guys really cared about it, but they couldn't take constant insults, constant escalations of thinking they were terrible after they'd done so much for her and were so really very involved with her and very loving towards her. So she might leave 25 messages on this guy's email or voicemail, accusing him of a ton of stuff over hardly anything, because she suddenly imagined the guy didn't care and he was rejecting her, or he was insulting her, or he was not treating her right. And then she would be so humiliated afterwards, realizing what she did and realizing she was the source of her own self-sabotage, destroying her own relationship time and time again. And then she would feel terrible. But in the moment when this would take over, she could not resist spewing out the poison against the guy, because she didn't have enough internalized of a good enough mother to modulate and think out the process of what had happened that she was interpreting, realize who he was in contrast to her mother, and make that separation in her mind. She didn't have a symbolic image of the mother or him and differentiate it. So she would just spew out the sense of being then imploded by rage against someone she had given herself fully to and being in love, and then she would want to attack the shit out of him till he felt as hurt as she felt when her mother would daily attack her when she was a young child and a teenager. So this became something that she realized she needed therapy for. We're not going to have time to go into the therapy process, but this is the predicament of the bad object experience, which can be resolved through object relations, psychoanalytic psychotherapy. Thank you.